steel. That's scary.
Oh,
and he's wearing a beanie.
Oh, I'm seeing some good buddies. I see Bill there. I see Charlie. Hey. Good to see you. Hi, chat. I see you there. All right. Nice to see everybody. I know you're still all connecting to audio. We're going to lose Woody today. We're just going to have Rick and Darren help me moderate this thing. Again, we're keeping most people muted just because we need to not have the insanity of 30 people all talking at once. But it's great to see everybody. Oh, go ahead, Woody.
We're still sharing the whole group scene here. I don't know how you can change that, but you're the host, so you can figure that one out.
Yeah, Woody has to jump out of here, unfortunately. Oh, wait, you still have people in the waiting room, though. We didn't disable the waiting room.
See, this is why I shouldn't do things. Let's see.
Hold on. There we go. I'll disable the waiting room. So, boom, everybody should just be in now.
Oh, wow. See, Gary Chisholm says he found out about office hours through a postcard in his order from Kirk Photo.
Nice.
He said he's watched most of the office hours on YouTube. Well, welcome to the live stream, Gary.
People are still coming in here. Pretty sure I've disabled the waiting room, so that won't be. All right. Yeah. So we've got everybody except the moderators and me. We got Rick and I and Darren. Woody's going to be leaving us muted for those that just came in. And for people that haven't been in one of these before, you know, occasionally with a question or a follow-up, we'll unmute someone. We've got a chat window here. If you look for your chat window, you can type questions in. We'll be watching that. For those of you over on YouTube live, we've got Darren kind of moderating that to a certain extent. And today we're going to talk about photographing the full moon, which always rises in opposition to sunset and sets in opposition to sunrise. So we'll talk about some techniques for scouting and thinking out a location and time to be out photographing the full moon. And then we're gonna take a couple of weeks off here, office hours, and come back. You can look up the date for me, Rick.
The 4th.
But the 4th.
We'll come back on the 4th. We'll be off on the 28th. You guys will be getting ready, working on your full moon photos, and then we'll have a gallery for the office hours on the 4th of your moon shots, and we'll sort of go through them and talk about things.
Yeah, so the idea is we'll talk about sort of planning for this full moon that's coming on August 1st, and everybody can get out, shoot it, and upload a photo of it so we can talk about them and have a look at what people did. A little bit of an assignment here, so could be kind of a fun deal. All right, and I think Woody's gone now, so it's down to Rick and Darren and I. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to share my screen and talk about a few full moon photos that I've taken over time. I just went through and grabbed a few. Oh, wait 1 second here. I am somehow not the host.
I'm the
Rick,
host.
You're the host. Can you switch that to me so I can share my screen?
Uh-oh. I have no idea how not to be the host.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
I got it.
Not the host.
All right.
Woody did it.
Yeah, but you're still the host, Woody. Sorry, guys.
Changing.
All right, there we go. And so I'm about to share my screen. All right. Get to where I can really see what I'm doing here. All right, so I'm going to walk through this particular image that I thought I'd show. I'll go here in my Lightroom grid view. I've got some images I've captured with the moon over the years. This is from one of my favorite locations and a number of years back, and it was a really hazy night. That's one of the things about the moon is you get set up and you decide to go out and photograph a full moon. You do your research. Where am I going to be, to photograph this thing? And then sometimes the atmospherics don't cooperate. This image, there's no way for me to get it sharp because there's just so much haze and the dehaze tool won't work at all. Then there's times where you're just out somewhere. I wanted to go photograph dawn at the reservoir in Central Park, and suddenly I noticed that, you know, sunrise had come up, and all of a sudden there's the full moon rising behind the buildings in Manhattan. You know, so sometimes it's serendipity. Here's one from the I-205 bridge over the Columbia River with Mount Hood, where I'd done a little research. I'd noticed how beautiful the view of the mountain up the river was there. Obviously, you know, there's some industrial stuff and some docks and things, but I just wanted to get a shot with the full moon rising behind the mountain. In that last
I was with you that night.
You were. And then there's this one from Larch Mountain, one of my favorite places to photograph Mount Hood, which is sadly closed to vehicular traffic. They just didn't open it this summer after the COVID thing. Normally they open it after the snows had melted, but it's closed down right now. But there's a full moon rise. It was kind of a cloudy evening, so we didn't get that last sunset light. The light was blocked off the mountain, but still, you know, we had the position right. There was this winter morning where the sun rose, you know, the moon was setting at sunrise right over downtown. That made for kind of a fun reason to get out there and do a panorama. This is a huge file. I probably should have uploaded a 100% resolution preview before even trying to click on this, because it's 32,000 pixels wide. But well, if I move up here, you'll get an idea how big that full moon is back there. if it ever does load in here, we'll just let that one go. Here's another one that Rick was with me for in Death Valley, and I think this is kind of emblematic. This is what I love to do, because this is shot while there's still that last light of the day. Maybe it's a half an hour or 45 minutes before sunset that the moon's risen. And that lets you photograph the landscape in that last kind of beautiful light that the sun's putting out over the landscape, those soft shadows, because the sun is cutting through so much atmosphere, those magic hours to work with light in the landscape. The thing is that the moon is also being lit by the sun. Here's a little bit earlier that day. So they're both lit by the same light. They're the equal exposure. I mean, you can see here I'm working with a normal daylight exposure, ISO 100, f11, 160th of a second. And you've got all that really cool detail in the moon. You know, you're seeing all of its craters and forms, and you get the landscape at the same time, and you can put it low on the horizon. That's kind of my favorite time to be out photographing the moon. You can get these really dramatic shots right at sunset. It's going to take a lot of work with differentially kind of exposing the moon and the landscape, particularly if the sun's gone by the time the moon rises. This was an evening with my Portland workshop back in 2018 in the fall, and I kind of timed the workshop because I had done some sleuthing and saw that the moon was going to be rising right behind Mount Hood, actually off to the left side of Mount Hood, and then moving behind the mountain as it rose, just about half an hour before sunset. Unfortunately, we had a lot of haze and we had these low clouds, and the moon popped up coming out behind the mountain from the right, and it had already gotten dark, and so the exposure is kind of tricky. You know, you can see I'm shooting this at a 15th of a second. For some reason, I'm shooting it. Oh, it's because I had my long lens, my 800 millimeter on there, which, you know, that's a doubler on a 400 millimeter lens. So it puts me at a narrow aperture right off the bat. Stopping down a little bit puts me to f16 just to get a nice sharp image. But you can see that, you know, you're going to have to work this image to get detail out of the shadows and out of the moon at the same time, because it's much brighter. The minute that the world goes into shadow as the sun leaves the scene, suddenly you've got a moon that's lit by daylight. It's got sunlight hitting it directly. It's the same as if you were shooting a daylit landscape is what you need to get the moon. It's that sort of sunny 250 f8 rule. But by contrast, your landscape's going into darkness, and you need a really, you know, long shutter speed, high ISO, wide aperture, so the moon just gets blown out like a silver disc. So that's the thing that I'm always looking for here is as it got higher in the sky. I'm always looking for that time when the moon is rising a little bit before sunset. The sunrise is a little bit before the moon set. So they've got them both in the landscape lit by the sun. So how do you find that? I think that's the next big key to talk about. And I've got sort of my preferred app over the years has been the Photographer's Ephemeris. And I've noticed been kind of doing a few changes to it of late that make me a little bit sad. Now you have to pay $30 a year if you want to get a satellite view of the landscape and do some of the things that we used to be able to do on the web for free. But if you go to the Photographer's Ephemeris, you still get the Google Map based system for free. And you can run around and you can search by date. So what I've done here is I'm just going to show you how I scouted for this image the night that we had the little bit of cloud cover for my Portland workshop back in September 23rd, 2018. What I did was I went to the Photographer's Ephemeris website and I thought about, when would be a great time to photograph from Pittock Mansion. So you can go up here and you can type in Pittock Mansion. And when you do that search, up pops the Google Map location. This is the one I'm looking for in Multnomah County, Oregon. You say go, boom, it throws this little pin right on Pittock Mansion. And if you zoom in, you'll see that it's in the right spot there where the Pittock Drive ends, and that's kind of the overview lookout where people go to look at the view of Portland and Mount Hood behind it. So then you've got to back up and sort of say this and know what these lines mean. So this bright yellow line here represents the sunrise, the azimuth that the sun is going to be rising on this particular day that you choose on the calendar. And the blue line, this dark blue line going to the east, is the moonrise. Same thing with sunset and moonset. You've got a dark orange and a dark blue line heading off in the west. Those are the lines that the sun and the moon are going to rise and set on. And so you can back out here and you can move around and have a look. And this right here is Mount Hood. If I zoom in on it, you can see that's government camp. This is the Mount Hood National Forest. If I keep zooming in, you'll see Timberline Lodge and everything else. It was easier in the satellite view. And I'm going to show you an alternative for the phone, Photo Pills. It's also a pay app that'll let you do this on your phone now that they've copied a lot of the features from Photographer's Ephemeris into their planning guide. But essentially what you've got down here is a map of the day. So you can come down here and you can drag this little pointer along and you start at midnight on, we got to remember the date. We're back in August of 2000 or September of 2018. And you can scroll this little thing. You're at midnight going into 1 a.m. and you can see that the moon is moving through the landscape there. And then that the moon is above the horizon. So this central line here, 0 degrees, is altitude. And the moon right now is blue and the sun is orange. The moon is above the horizon and sets about 5 o'clock a.m. So you see it kind of going into that line where the moon sets to the east. Whoop, there it is. And then you can see the sun under the horizon. There's that little orange line coming along. And at 6:45 or so, boom, the sun's rising out onto the landscape. And it rolls along through the day. So you can sort of figure out where's the sun going to be at any point during the day. Zoom around in the map, figure out where it's going to be behind what. It's a really valuable planning tool. But eventually you see that the sun is about to set and the moon pops up about the same time, just a little bit before sunset, right behind Mount Hood. So that's what you're looking for. And the nice thing about the Photographer's Ephemeris that Photo Pills doesn't have is this ability to sort of jump. You can jump one day, or you can go to the next major moon phase. So right now you can see that where we were the previous day, it's going to tell you that the moon is basically full, 98.96%, getting bigger, waxing. If you hit this little button here, it'll show you you're going to go to the full moon night. If you go to the next one, it goes to a 50% moon. The next one goes to the new moon. So you're kind of moving through the calendar by full moon, half moon, new moon, half moon, full moon, back and forth. And you can watch where those lines are on the landscape. So that's a tool. What I did to find that particular day was set my pin on Pittock Mansion because I knew there was a beautiful view to the east of Mount Hood, and just moved through the calendar until I saw that blue line right over the mountain. And then you just sort of move through the days a little bit, and you see basically you can find the day where the new moon rises where you want it to be, and then just kind of line it up. So that's sort of my trick for using the photographer's ephemeris to figure out where to go to photograph a moon, and you can sort of move through your date range. Now we know from having a look here. Let me pull up my phone for a second for y'all. I've got my phone sitting in front of me, and I'm casting it to my screen on my computer, and I'm looking at this app called the Photographer's Ephemeris, or Sun Surveyor. And Sun Surveyor has a number of cool things. It has a live view where if you flip up your camera, you go into live view, you can sort of see, where in the world. You can see my studio set up right now. You can see where in the world the sun is going to be rising and the moon is going to be setting and all those kinds of things live on your screen. It also has this ephemeris set up. And along that, there's a number of things that you can look at. You can look at ephemeris about the sun. You can look at ephemeris about the moon. You can look at ephemeris about the Milky Way. So I've got it set for Saturday, August the 1st, 2020 on the date here. If I touch that, you can choose what date you want to look at. And if I look at photo opportunities, it shows us things around that date that are of interest. You can see that between now and then, the Milky Way is visible, and what hours the Milky Way is visible. If you want to jump in and have a look at, it tells us that on Saturday, August 1st, the full moon is going to be low in a color changing sky. If we go and look at the moon's data for that night, you see that the moon rise is at 7:45 p.m. If we look at the sun, we see that sunsets at 8:30. So we have 45 minutes of light on the landscape as the moon is rising. So that's the perfect day. If you go in here and have a look at the next day, August 2nd, the moon is going to be rising at 8:30. That's basically the same time as sunset. So you're going to have a very narrow window. The landscape's going to be really dim. It's going to be tough to get that exposure right. So it tells me that the correct day for this to really look at is August 1st. Okay, so that's basically my planning tool. I get out in the landscape and I'll go into that live view in Sun Surveyor, and I'll have a look at where's the moon going to be rising on the horizon. Right, it's right over there by my printer. You can see, on August 1st, if I was standing out there with my date set right, that's going to show me the point in the landscape just to kind of confirm what I had chosen for a location.
I might add that there's a few apps out there that do this. It's not just Sun Surveyor.
It's not just Sun Surveyor. In fact, I'm about to show you another one that I think a lot of people already have, which is PhotoPills. And PhotoPills throws in the neat thing of having a really similar thing to the photographer's ephemeris. So PhotoPills, you can drop a pin in a location. Like right now, I have it set for that date in September that I photographed from Pittock Mansion. I have the pin on Pittock Mansion, and it's giving us the satellite view where you can really easily see that moonrise was going to be right behind Mount Hood. And I can scroll through the hours of the day with a really similar graph to photographer's ephemeris. You can see the moon rise, and at 8:15, boom, there it is. Very, very, very similar. It also has these neat augmented reality things that you can do, which are very, very similar. If you go into the sun, you can get your sunrise, sunset. If you go into the moon, you can get all that kind of data, but you can also go into augmented reality and get a view of where the sun is going to be in the landscape on a given day. Very, very similar. In fact, I think that as the development goes along, I've long been a fan of Sun Surveyor, but I think lately I've been more of a fan of the photographer's ephemeris or of PhotoPills, because they've been just developing the heck out of it and making it easier and easier to use. And one of the things I love with PhotoPills, that's a topic for another office hour, is the Milky Way. The fact that you can get an augmented reality view of where the Milky Way is going to be in the landscape on a given day at a given time. So you can get out in a location and hold up your phone and say, oh, the Milky Way is going to be right behind the arch on this day. And it's just very accurate. So that's, I think, what I would recommend is for you folks to use either PhotoPills if you have it, and I'd highly recommend that you use it on a tablet, because the map is going to be kind of small to be looking around on your phone, or the photographer's ephemeris on the computer. The thing I've always loved about the photographer's ephemeris is being able to use it on my computer with the bigger screen with a mouse, and it's just easier to scroll around a map and search for locations and see everything at the same time. I think the fact that PhotoPills has gotten so good would lend credence to maybe putting that on your tablet and using it as a search platform, particularly now that Photographer's Ephemeris is starting to want to charge us to have a satellite view. And it's a monthly, or it's an annual $30 a year or $4 a month if you go monthly.
Can I throw in just a word of praise for Photographer's Ephemeris, because they were free for so long.
This is true.
And I think part of what you're seeing with apps like PhotoPills and Sun Surveyor is for them to kind of compete with what was originally, not necessarily a for-profit endeavor. They have to do something like that. $30 a year, if this is what you do, is not outrageous. So
it's not outrageous.
I'm just going to say,
it's true. It's not outrageous.
I'm all for people making a little bit of money off of the stuff that they do. But that's it. What about, do you want to talk a little bit about composition and things to look for? I think we can all agree that a shot of just the moon is a beautiful thing, but it's also just a shot of the moon. So how do you go about thinking about, right? And how do you think about where to line yourself up, where to be looking in the area that you're near to try and figure out the things?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, the assignment that I kind of want to leave everyone with for our next set of office hours and for going out and capturing an image of this full moon that's coming is to, we're obviously not all traveling to far-flung exotic places with the whole pandemic that's occurring. So I think that finding something near you, which either has a beautiful, something that you'd love to put the moon with to the east of you or to the west of you. If it's to the west, you're going to do it at sunrise. And if it's to the east, you're going to do it at sunset. And then use the tools that we've just been talking about, whether it's the Photographer's Ephemeris, whether it's PhotoPills, find where you need to be to line that moon up with your subject. So, I think about Haystack Rock on the Oregon coast. That's a real easy one for anybody in Oregon. If you go out at dawn, if the forecast is not to have a heavy marine layer where it's just completely fogged out and you won't see the moon, which happens so often in August in Oregon on the coast. If you get out there at dawn, if you use Photographer's Ephemeris or PhotoPills, you can set the map view up and just move your pin until the line on the beach runs right back behind Haystack Rock, with it maybe off to the left or off to the right. I would think about Haystack Rock. Haystack Rock has this big, beautiful haystack-looking rock just off the coast to the west, and it has these two neat little kind of towers of rock off to the left side. So I would think from a compositional standpoint, it would be neat to maybe have the moon rising behind those two little towers of rock off to the left side, framed up with the whole rock filling the frame, nice and large with a long lens from back on the beach. And using those apps would tell you where to park along the beach to get there and be standing. And you can use your phone once you get there, whether you're using Sun Surveyor or PhotoPills augmented reality view, to stand and look at where is the moon actually coming up behind those rocks from the beach, and get your tripod set up and be ready when it happens. So that's sort of the assignment, is find that thing that you'd like to put the moon behind. And again,
So,
you know,
so some
we're
of
looking,
this, some of this is scouting beforehand.
exactly.
We know the date when the moon is going to be rising or setting, if you're going to do to the west, and drive around, think about places that would have a Western exposure, that type of thing. One of the questions that came up about these apps is David wanted to know how many of these apps are usable when there's no cell service. Can you pre-plan, have the info available when you're in a location without cell service?
It's pretty amazing because they don't use a ton of data and they sort of have their library relatively updated. I think you might have a difficult time if you leave data and suddenly you want to look at something 10 years from now or 5 years from now, but they do a really good job with particularly the live view when you get out on the scene, because they're just using GPS and overlaying GPS coordinates on your camera. So as long as you fire,
I know Sky Guide does that. I mean, I can be out there with no cell service whatsoever, and it's got, what it's putting up for maps is pretty limited, and it's all in the app itself.
I haven't tested photo pills extensively. When we were using it, I really started kind of using it on our trip in Joshua Tree for the Milky Way, the augmented reality with the Milky Way. And we had, obviously, Joshua Tree is kind of LA's outdoor recreation area, so it's got great cell coverage. But I've used Sun Surveyor in the wilds of Patagonia, far, 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 far from any data connection, and it's never given me a problem. So, I've actually never had a problem with Sun Surveyor's live view not being on the ready. I don't think it uploads much data. I think it keeps a few months around where and when you are just stored on the phone so that it's ready whenever you need it.
It's all tables and math is really what it is. So
yeah, it's not a lot of data. So, all right. We got some questions?
Yeah. Let's see here.
Oh, one more thing while you're looking at questions about the scouting. I think that I showed you really fast that's one thing I do love photographers ephemeris for, is that moon phase button. So that big kind of double button that's like the end of the track instead of just light fast forward. It will jump from, like I said, full moon, half moon, new moon, half moon, full moon, half moon, all through the year. And you can just watch where that blue line moves around on your map. So, if we're not talking about where are we going to be for August 1st, if you find something beautiful from a specific spot, you put your pin on that spot and just zap through the whole year watching that blue line. And when it's a full moon, you know where to be. Mark that on your calendar. I need to be at this place that day, and watch the weather leading up to it. And that's yielded some really beautiful stuff for me over the years.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions. There's the lens focal length exposure time recommendations for capturing the moon.
Yeah.
And then we've also got a few people who are having trouble getting tack sharp shots of the moon. So I'm just wondering if you've got any ideas on, what's the best way to capture moonrise to get the moon sharp?
Right.
People are asking, should I do a composite? That type of thing. So
if you have something close in the foreground and you're using a really long lens, and by close with the long lens, that's very relative. If you decide you want to photograph this moonrise at 800 millimeters and you have something that's 50 yards away, it might be a different focus point than the moon itself. I think you can stop down a little bit, but really long lenses have very shallow depth of field. So that would be a good reason to photograph the foreground subject sharp and the moon sharp. I think that for what we're talking about, trying to have some light on the landscape at the same time as the moon's out there in the landscape, the exposure is easy in that situation. The one I showed in Death Valley, where the dunes are lit and the full moon's there, or those mountains in the background with the full moon right there, they're both being lit by the sun, and so it really is a daylight exposure. But the moon should always be a daylight exposure. If you're wanting to photograph the moon after sunset and blue hour and twilight, I think to get a natural looking image, you have to consider it to be nothing but it's going to be silhouettes. I wish I had it at hand, but one of the inspiring images of the moon for me was a shot that Art Wolf got back in the film days in Turkey with the fairy chimneys. You know, they've got the little capstone. It's kind of like the toadstools in Utah, where there's a column of sandstone and there's a rock sitting on top, and they have these kind of crazy, you know, druid-like looks to them in the landscape. He had those at blue hour silhouette, and he framed it with a long lens to put the moon back behind, and he got a few of them up on a hill where, you know, there's almost no foreground. It's just those towers going up into the blue of pre-black space with the moon back behind it. And in that kind of situation, you're just going to spot meter the moon, and it's going to be a daylight exposure. And then you'll have to pull the shadows enough just to get a black silhouette with blue back there. I would argue for bracketing a scene like that, at least, you know, 3 stops underexposed, 3 stops overexposed, 1 on the light meter. And then you have the ability to do some blending if you want. But you'll probably find that the one that you meter the moon for on the light meter will let you get it. That's the complicated moon shot. You know, to really photograph the moon and the landscape at the same time at night is just, it's nearly impossible unless you're going to do a crazy composite where you take a moon shot that's exposed one way and the landscape that's exposed another. And I mean, it's possible. That's a different thing. What I'm looking for here on this assignment is let's do it where we have the last light from the sun on the landscape still. It's August, so the odds are weather is going to be good most places, and the moon at the same time. So the exposure is actually pretty easy if you've got that situation. You don't need to spot meter at all. You just leave your matrix metering or your what's Canon call it, and Sony they call it the
Oh, it's been so long.
Since you switched out of it, evaluative.
Yeah.
You let the camera make the exposure decision, maybe bracket it if you want to be careful. But I mean, when you've got daylight putting light and shadows on the landscape and the moon in the scene, they're going to be pretty much the same exposure. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
The minute that the light leaves the landscape, it gets complicated. The moon suddenly becomes orders of magnitude brighter than the landscape because it's still lit by the sun. It's still hanging up there, catching the direct sunlight. So
yeah, I think that the Death Valley shot, which I have a almost replica of, is sort of the what you're looking for. You know, I dare say it's easy, but it's less complicated to create. And the issue is more, you know, trying to find that foreground that helps make the shot.
Right. You know, and this image is 105 millimeters.
Yeah.
This one, you know, to give you a frame of reference, is 800 millimeters. So the choice is really yours. This one's at 340 millimeters. So I know I was using my Nikon 70-200 with a 1.4 teleconverter. I do that a fair bit. That's always in the bag with me. You know, here's one shot at 200 millimeters as a panorama. And likewise, this one's at 400 millimeters as a panorama. Gives you an idea of the relative size of the moon to the landscape and different focal lengths. That's completely your choice. You know, here's one at about 200 millimeters. I think my one in Portland is 50 millimeters. The moon's small, but it's cool. You know, it adds an element to that scene that wouldn't be there but for. This one, again, the exposure's pretty easy because the first light is starting to hit those buildings. The moon's a little bit brighter. The sun hasn't really hit the scene yet. But this one's what we're talking about here, for real. That's the one we're aiming for, February in 2018.
So some of us live in beautiful places, you know, gorgeous sort of outdoor landscapes and wilderness. Any suggestions for people who live in an urban environment of how to scout, where to be thinking about stuff? I mean, I understand it's, you know, I would recommend someone to start with Photographers Ephemeris and just sort of look like what is the general direction.
Oh yeah.
But you know, thinking about, you know, what sort of stuff would you be looking for to kind of help make that moon pop, you know, in a beautiful landscape, it's urban landscape.
Let's reverse what I was talking about a second ago in Photographers Ephemeris for 1 second. I'm going to share my screen one more time. You know, let's say you were in, you know, here I am in Portland. Let's say it's the city that I'm interested in. You know, you can scroll in and really get yourself, you know, say located downtown on, you know, in between buildings or what have you, and then just, you know, move this thing around, set yourself on, just go to the current, going to 2020, August 1st. Ooh, wow, it's quite a bit in the south, isn't it? So as I look at this thing, I can start moving around and look at what's along that line. And if I've got a building that I think is beautiful that I'd like to put the moon alongside, you know, you can literally zoom way in and put yourself in different positions and just move yourself so that that line is where you want it with the thing downtown. Say that's a building, or, you know, there's a park that you love to go to that has a beautiful tree and a clearing. You know, zoom in on the map level to where you're in that clearing and see, you know, where you can set yourself to maybe put the moon by that beautiful tree. I think the biggest thing is finding that piece of foreground that you'd like to put with the moon, and then use the scouting tools that we've been talking about to figure out where you need to be to put that moonrise line. And also, you know, scroll that timeline along, figure out which way the moon is moving as it rises. Because it's, you know, if it rises and it's moving to the right like it does on the map, you know, it's heading sort of south as it goes, you're going to need to think about being in a place where you can kind of move along with it. You don't just want the tip of it as it emerges behind the thing. It might need to be a little higher on the horizon. So that kind of planning thing. And this is a thing that the more you do it, the more it makes sense. It's just, you got to go out there and practice it. And there's nothing wrong with going out and finding, like we did with my workshop that 2 years ago in Portland. You know, we had it all planned. We were there. We got there early so that we all had kind of a primary position in a place that's off photographed. And I figured we weren't the only people that had done a little bit of research. And we got our tripods all nice and tight, you know, it's not Mesa Arch by any stretch of the imagination, but there were people there, and we tried to be as courteous and take as little space as we could. And then, you know, the haze and the low cloud was just an atmospheric thing that happened to us that night. It was even kind of hard to tell that it was there until the light got low and the moon started coming up, and we're like, oh, bummer, you know, it's really obscuring the moon. So, you know, it's not always going to work out, but the more you put yourself out there in the right spot, the more likely you are to have it happen. I'll give an example of a crescent moonrise that I did a number of years ago. It's a totally different thing. The new moonrise is a totally kind of different exercise, but I had a new moonrise that I was excited to get over Mount Hood from a specific location, and it was in February back in 2013. This is a panorama, and the forecast, this is a crazy story because it's where we talked about Larch Mountain where the road's closed now. The road was closed then, and I had to snowshoe, I don't know, like 4 miles up this road and set up a snow camp and find my way out to this observation point in the snow and in the dark. And it was snowing and cloudy, but the forecast was for the next day for it to clear. And I didn't know if it was going to clear in the night or if it was going to clear too late in the day. But I got myself up there, and sure enough, it cleared about 4 a.m., except for this low cloud down below. and it worked out like gangbusters. But, you know, it could as easily have been heavy overcast that morning and I got nothing. So, you know, there's the exercise is what it's all about. You know, I would say even share your images of the duds with us for the next office hours. Let's hear the story. You know,
Yeah,
I'm excited.
yeah.
I mean, if it doesn't work, well, then it's still a great exercise. You can talk through, you know, briefly describe what your plan was and why it didn't work and show us the photo. I mean, I'm excited to see.
You got any thoughts about either HDR or panos with this exercise? A couple people have asked.
Like I said, I mean, I think that if your decision is that you really want to capture the moon in a darkened landscape with a twilight sky, you're probably going to need some HDR work to do with it. That's a case where it's nice to have an app like on one where you can choose the ghosting, which image you want to use for ghosting. So you can say, this is the image that I want to hold the moon steady at, and it will blend the moon so that there's no blur because the moon's moving. You can't do too long of an exposure of the moon. You know, so depending on your focal length, it's just like the stars, except a little bit worse. It's moving faster than the stars are moving through your view frame. And I haven't really ever researched that because for what we're talking about, it's not going to be critical. None of these shots I've shown you are anywhere approaching a second long. You know, I would think you want to stay under a couple seconds, especially at a longer lens. Maybe even less than that with a really long lens. You know, like I said, when I talk about bracketing for that twilight shot, I think it's more about just being able to choose which one you want to process. I mean, I wouldn't think so much about HDR. For panorama, absolutely. And the software is so good that the little bit of moon motion, it's going to be able to blend those just fine. Panorama, just like any other image, if you have the shot and you love it and you want it higher resolution or maybe a little different view from, you know, a standpoint of image compression, using a longer lens to sweep across a wider scene, absolutely, a panorama can be great.
Yeah.
That image I just showed of the crescent moon's a panorama, not because it needed to be. I could have easily captured that, you know, at 40 millimeters instead of 135 millimeters, but I wanted to have a really high quality enlargeable result. You know, I worked hard to get up there. I wanted it to be something that I could print huge.
Right.
And I've printed it, you know, over 8 feet wide and it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm more of a crescent moon kind of guy myself. I'm not one for the full moon, but you know, and I think one of the things we're talking about here is we're trying to set it up so that things are not overcomplicated for you, right? That really think about the composition, think about the landscape, whether it's urban or rural, you know, and try and nail that right. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, find out where you want to be, get there early, you know, take a snack, enjoy it. And just enjoy the moon too. I love watching the moon rise. I was coming back from a spot where we were kiteboarding last full moon. And we had the kids in the car or in the Subaru, and we were driving along the Columbia River back towards Portland. We were about halfway out to the coast from Portland along the river is where we were kiting. And it was that beautiful kind of mauve evening. You know, the sun was just going down. The sky was getting kind of purple mauve in the east. And all of a sudden the moon, it was one of those crazy moons where the atmospherics make it look way bigger than normal. And it started coming up over the horizon. And I mean, my kids at 3 and 4 were just enchanted. And, you know, the whole drive back was so much fun because we were watching the moon. And my boy Pike at 4 said the craziest sentence. He said, "Dad, it's difficult to watch the moon from a moving vehicle." And I was like, wow, that's awesome. It made me happy. I was like, those are some big words. That's great, buddy. So, and you're right. You're right.
So
we should stop.
I don't have any real questions left on the moon. If anybody's got any questions, put them in the chat or on YouTube. if you don't have anything else to add, there are a couple of people who just would like a little more insight into NEOWISE. We've still got a few nights left.
Oh yeah.
You did do an ATS last week on NEOWISE.
Yep.
It talks about scouting and things like that.
Yep.
I had one question from YouTube. Someone said, could you explain why you took so many images of the comet, what you did with them in post-processing, and was the image you showed, and I'm assuming this is in the YouTube, was it a single or a composite?
Oh yeah, I didn't do any compositing with NEOWISE. No. Well, I did a panorama. There was a panorama I did that had kind of the brighter orange sky behind it. I don't have that in my catalog right now, but it had a brighter orange sky. It was earlier in the evening. And it was mainly because I had this strong desire to shoot the comet with my 105 1.4 millimeter lens. Just I thought that would be really, really cool, but it was too long a focal length for the scene that I was standing in front of. It didn't have enough of the river and the pilings. And so before I went in my bag and switched to the 85 1.8 lens, I just did a panorama vertically to capture the scene with that 105 millimeter. I'm much happier with the later image that I took with the 85 1.8. That's a single frame. And I think you could do some HDR work with NEOWISE if you wanted to, or just blend a foreground that's a little bit brighter with the comet up above. That's certainly something that would be easily done. But you know, I think that if you just play around with exposures a little bit, you're going to find that it's not that difficult to capture in a single frame.
Yeah.
Rick?
Well, our good friend Charlie said that he did some panorama merges of the comet and had some faint streaks in the sky.
Yeah.
And he said he was using all manual settings and wanted to know if you had any suggestions for how to fix that. We talked a little bit about that yesterday.
We did, and I actually I went through that really fast and didn't notice it was a panorama and was really weirded out by the lines, the vertical lines in that. But now that I read it closer and I'm moving a little slower, if you're shooting wide open, you often get a little bit of vignetting. Doesn't Lightroom have a radio button for remove vignetting when it does its panorama blending, or is that only in Photoshop?
I think that's only in Photoshop.
So that was going to be my suggestion to Charlie is if Lightroom has, if the vignetting is causing some lines in the frame, you can select all your images in Lightroom that you want to blend into a panorama. And then you right click the selected group and you say edit in and you say merge to panorama in Photoshop. And it'll open a dialog box that has more options than you're used to in Lightroom. And one of those is to automatically remove vignetting. Just click that checkbox and let it run through the Photoshop engine. It'll come back as a whole series of layers that are masked to create the panorama. And you just take a look at it, zoom in, move around it, make sure it looks good. And then you can go to layers, merge all layers, and then just save that PSD file, and it'll pop back up in Lightroom as your panorama. And I think it'll eliminate that vignetting for you. I think that's the solution for you. Photoshop's panorama tools are a little more nuanced than Lightroom. Lightrooms are awesome, but there are times when I jump to Photoshop because Lightroom isn't quite cutting it.
Yeah, well, Photoshop has a couple more options with merging panoramas. They both use the same engine.
Yeah.
The other suggestion that I would have when I've run into issues with building panoramas, oftentimes I'll take 10 or 12 slices to build a panorama, and I run into issues with blending. Sometimes what I'll do is actually go through and pull out some of those slices because I've got enough overlap that I can make that up. That was something I got from you in terms of, you know, working on these things. So you can try that too. If you did 10, try 8 or 6 and see if that helps.
Yeah. I got a feeling from looking at Charlie's though that like every single one had some vignetting, so those are going to pop up somewhere. But
yeah.
All right. It was a good question though, and a cool image.
Let's see.
And when it comes to NEOWISE, I mean, I'm going back out again. I think it's getting a little dimmer and further away looking.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going back out again tomorrow night into dark sky area to see what happens and do the little Milky Way testing too. So,
one thing, and we talked about this last week, but it's worth talking again. One question from David: is there an exposure time that you shouldn't go over when photographing the moon, or when you're trying to get basically pinpoint stars, right? And he cites the 500 rule when shooting astrophotography.
I think I used the 500 rule for a really long time, and some of my older training tutorials and things make heavy reference to the 500 rule. And I'm finding that with the quality of optics that we have now and the resolution that we have now, when you zoom into 100%, the 500 rule is just not cutting it anymore.
Would you explain the 500 rule just so people know what you're talking about?
Okay, good point. This is why it's always good to have Rick with me. The 500 rule is a rule that we used for a really long time, and it basically says whatever focal length you're photographing the stars with, you should put 500 over that focal length in a fraction, and you shouldn't exceed that number of seconds. So if we're shooting at 50 millimeters, you put 500 over 50, you have 5 seconds, or 10 seconds. Sorry, 500 over 50 equals 10. So that's 10 seconds at 50 millimeters. You get down to 14 millimeters, theoretically, you should have about 30 seconds to work with. But I find that I get little tiny star trails when I zoom in. They're not sharp, they're not pinpoint. And there's another place that the Photo Pills app has just been really awesome with. So I'm gonna share my screen one more time since we're talking about this. And hold on, do I still have? I do. Yeah, sharing my screen. I'm gonna pull up my phone. I'm gonna go into Photo Pills here really quick. And if we go into its just main setting here, it has spot stars. And when you click on that, you can say, what is my camera? Nikon Z6. What is my lens? The 20 millimeter. What aperture are you going to shoot at? I could say, 1.8. And it tells me that the 500 rule says 25 seconds, but this NPF rule, taking into account the megapixels of your camera, says 5.62 seconds for pinpoint stars. And you can play around. You can say, well, maybe increasing exposure actually buys me time, oddly enough. Increasing aperture actually buys me time, which would be counterintuitive normally. You'd think that, but that's the problem with that, of course, is that you get a dimmer exposure. So
right, but
the more you stop down your lens, the less light you're letting in, so the longer time you actually need. So it's a balancing act. So I would say take your camera body and enter it in here, and or look on the web for an MPF rule website. But I will say that the Photo Pills app makes that really easy, and it has all the modern cameras in there.
And I'll say, so last week while I was out shooting NEOWISE, what I was doing was playing with exposure time. And I would take a shot, and then I would go into, I'd look at the image and I would zoom way in, as much magnification as I could possibly see that shot. And I could tell that my stars were not pinpoint, and so then I would go in and I would say, okay, I'm going to go a little bit less time. And that's kind of how I dialed it in. I will say that the NPF rule, we pretty much, that became our new rule after the Moab workshop last fall. I mean, I had been using the 500 rule forever, and was not happy with the stuff that I was getting as a result of it. So,
and I'll also say that if you combine the MPF rule with some of the star stacking apps that are out there now, or a star guider where your camera is moving along with the stars and you can do longer exposures, you can ditch that app if you've got a good star guider, and you can just go longer because your camera's moving with the stars. That's one technique, but then you get a blurry landscape, and you're going to have to do some kind of a composite where you shoot an image for the landscape and then you let the stars go. But if you if you use a stacking app like Starry Landscape Stacker for the Mac, I can't remember the PC version, it also works. What you wind up doing is set your interval limiter. Say the MPF rule tells you have 9 seconds with your wide angle lens. Well, bump up your ISO to where it's quite noisy. Go to 6400 ISO at 10 seconds and shoot a series of those, one after the other, after the other, after the other, with a pause for noise reduction. So say every 20, or don't even do noise reduction. Try it both ways. And what you do is you feed all those images into this app, and you can sort of paint, well, this is my foreground, this stays still in red, and paint space in blue, and you just do it's pretty easy to do masking in this app. It makes it pretty easy for you. And it will take all the stars and shift them from all the images to where they're aligned, like a panorama would do. And then it does this miraculous thing from sort of video noise reduction technology, where it looks at all the images and sees what's the same and what's changing, and just eliminates the noise, and it gets you a really ridiculously clean result, even though each individual image had a lot of noise in it. By sampling all of them and just finding out what's changing in between them that shouldn't be, it just eliminates that, and you get a really beautiful, clean, pinpoint image. So that's a cool trick, something to try, something I'm going to talk about after I get out in the field and do a little bit more of it.
Starry Landscape Stacker is an app.
Pretty amazing.
It's like $30, $40, something.
Yeah.
Okay, we're kind of getting down to the end here. I've got a couple of questions. I will make one mention. Rob Hogarth and a couple of other people have talked about Stellarium, which you and I have not really looked at, and we probably should, but both last week and this week, a number of people have recommended that. All right. It looks like there's an online version sort of similar to Photographer's Ephemeris.
Okay.
And speaking of Rob, so I've got 2 more questions, one gear question. Don't let me forget this, because it's the second week in a row. So Rob says, flipping the script, so to speak, with full moons, have you ever shot an image using moonlight as the source of light to give the illusion of daylight on the foreground, but with a star field in the sky?
Yes, I have. I've done that in Moab and Double Arch, and it's cool. I mean, that was the first time I had, I'm trying to remember what camera it was. It was the first time when I was using a camera that had such good high ISO quality that I was shooting these images, and we were kind of going after the moon, and then I turned back and shot up into Double Arch, and I thought, wow, this looks like this weird version of bluish daylight with stars out behind it. And yeah, you absolutely can turn around in the night after shooting your full moon. If you're out someplace wild without a lot of light, you can shoot in moonlight. Absolutely. It's pretty cool. Worth playing with and trying.
I've done a bunch of that work, Valley of Fire in Nevada, Moab, again, the same stuff. You want to have a good composition. You want to have a tripod, you want to make sure that you're working, I've done a couple of sort of HDRs of stuff like that to try and get, both good, well-lit foreground and get that sky sort of pinpoint in the pad. It's not difficult. It's just one of those things that takes practice.
Yep, exactly. But it's certainly possible. Good tripod, key.
Yeah. All right. So last question. Peter Jobbins has asked, he has a tripod with a leveling base and is on the waiting list for the Acrotech panorama kit that you've been talking about lately. He said he was planning to buy the Kirk LRP 3 reel. Does he need anything else? I mean,
no, as long as you have a way to level that head, I think you're going to love it. And I just was talking with Acrotech last week, and I know they're trying to get all those orders filled. I put that video out, and I told them, but they weren't anticipating how many people were excited about that. So they've sold a lot of them. And I think I'll tell you, if weight is no object, I'd still rather have my Manfrotto 500 AH because of the fluid. It's for video work and just not having your camera flop. But the Acrotech, you can set that base tension like you would a ball head, but the difference is it pans and it tilts, and it has these beautiful gauges and degrees with different markers for 5, 10, and 15 degrees. And it's got a set point that you can put your origination for your panorama marker, and then you can always come back to it and know right where you were. It's really nicely made for doing panoramas. And it has the beautiful ability, like the fluid head, to just shift a little to the left without losing level, a little up, a little down. It lets you fine tune your composition the same way. And it weighs a pound and holds 25 pounds. It's a pretty amazing tool. I'm digging it. I've been using it a ton just to prove that I like it. You know, I mean, and because it's fun and new and novel to me, like any new tool, I've been taking it with me on trips, even when, you know, I could easily take the other one just because it's kind of fun. And no, as long as you've got a way to level it from beneath, the only thing you need is that LRP3. That's one of the nice things about that setup, particularly with the Leo Photo tripod, and that head is all you got to do is buy the two, because the Leo Photo tripod has the built-in little leveling adapter, and the whole thing is less than 4 pounds. Boom, it's everything you need.
Okay. Well, I think we have wasted another hour of everybody's time.
Oh, one quick more thing for the folks that are loyalists for the office hours. If you're thinking about buying a big, tall, leveling head tripod, just hold off a little bit, because I think there's something coming in the next couple of weeks I'm excited about that's going to be a little cheaper than the Gitzo I've been carrying, and lighter, and just as tall. So stand by for that.
Okay. So we'll be off next week. We've got the full moon on the 1st, and people have assignments. We'll probably, I imagine Woody will probably not get the uploads ready until after the 1st.
No, yeah, the gallery.
Gallery, and then we'll meet again on the 4th, and we'll look at some of your images, and hopefully everybody has a great couple of weeks and has some fun scouting and shooting. So,
and you know,
right.
hit me up with questions, emails, whatever, you know, as you're doing this thing. I'll answer to the best of my ability. So,
okay.
All right, everybody.
All right, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. Be well.
Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you later. All right.